I'll have to ask that you guys excuse the noise. Yet again, my washing machines are running here while I'm trying to work on the truck, so kind of is what it is. So what you see there on the floor is the old chrome front grille that came with my Toyota Tacoma. As you can see, I've modified it by cutting out the grill strakes from the center and putting in a mesh grill. It used to have, of course, the scoops on either side and the classic Toyota script in the center. This is commonly referred to amongst Tacoma people as a Satoshi Grill because of a Japanese gentleman by the name of Satoshi who came up with the mod. It's been done amongst Toyota guys for a long time. And I'm going to rebuild that on my truck, but I'm going to do it with a brand new grill that's not chrome and is actually a nice black grill. And that's part of the look that I'm going for. I think I'm going to leave the grill black and then paint match the new bumper that I have, although I have been tempted to leave the new bumper black as well, and I'll show you guys that. So here's the new bumper. As you can see, it's all black. It's nothing inherently wrong with chrome, but it's no longer really in vogue. It's no longer stylish, right? It kind of dates things that have it. That and the chrome bumper that I have is all rusted in back. Now the valence is also in pretty bad shape, so I've actually gone ahead and gotten rid of this, taking this bumper and valence off. I have to order new valence, and I got all new stainless hardware to mount the valence to the bumper, and stainless hardware to mount the bumper to the brackets that go on the truck. I typically replace stuff with either 316 or 18/8 stainless steel hardware as I go along, just in places, you know, that you're holding something mostly aesthetic. Not that these things aren't strong enough for the application either. Stainless 316 stainless is plenty strong. It's not very heavy. I'm talking about very small hardware, but I'm going to be putting on that a whole new front end, basically same exact form factor, but just all brand new components. And I'm going to be making a black grill to replace this thing because I don't like it. So here's my brand new grill, currently on top of my active washing machines. Got a hacksaw, got my Dremel tool in a box, and I'm going to go outside and start modifying it. Alright, so first I'm going to undo all these vertical connecting sections on the grill piece, and I'll use my hacksaw for that. Done that. Now I'll come in from the back using a Dremel and I'll clean this stuff out. That should allow me to undo most of this, although I will have to go around through the front and cut these. Alright, so at this point I've removed the center grill. I've also gone and cut out some parts here, and that's because in my truck I have these 3D printed scoops that go here. You won't have to do this if you're doing a standard Satoshi. Really, the only thing you'll have left to do at this point is just to cut off these excess vertical sections. I'm going to use a combination of the hacksaw and a Dremel to get those gone, and then probably finish them off just with some block sanding. And of course, at that point, then you have to paint the entire thing. If you'd have had, right, you were just doing standard Satoshi on this grill, you also have these like cutouts where the horizontal strakes went, so that would be ugly. You'd have had to cut that down, fill it in, and sand it, paint it, etc. In my case, they're completely gone because these scoops take that space. Now I'm just going to go ahead and remove all these little sections. Take my scoops out of here. Nice thing about the hacksaw is it doesn't require hearing or respiratory protection. When you're using the Dremel, make sure that you have both on. The noise is bad for your ears, and this smell is 100% toxic. Just want to cut these down as best I can, just so that I minimize how much work I have to do with the Dremel afterward. I've cut off every single one of the strakes coming out of here using a hacksaw, and came back in with a cutoff wheel and Dremel and just evened it out a bit. Now I'm going to go ahead with a sanding block and just try to even these out as much as I can. This is 120 grit sandpaper, by the way. I'll use the 120 just to get this stuff down flat, and then I'll come back in with 220 and 320 to smooth it out a bit. Now there are a bunch of ways that you can hold your new grill mesh onto this thing. In my particular case, I cut it so that there's enough overhang that it can bend over the insides here like that. And then I'll put screws through here to grab it. So I kind of just leave some little tabs of material that bend over that way. Then if you look at my scoops that I have, they actually have some holes cut out in them. The mesh rests on them, and then I put the screws through there to hold them on. I also bolt these in to the top of the grill, which I'm actually going to drill for right now. So got a 90-degree attachment on a Dremel with a drill bit. First one, let's position that more or less how I want it. Alright, should be able to come in right here. Just drill a hole real quick. Alright, so I've got that mounting hole. Test fit the screw. Might need a slightly bigger drill bit, but that's okay. Now it's time to mount the grill. I've already placed all the little clips into the slots, so all I really have to do is put the grill up there, and this should be good to go. Should align my intake tube here. still. Gonna give me problems. Wow. So these things have these little grooves in them, little cutouts. There are clips in the grill that actually hold them in. Right, they're these plastic clips, so you have to make sure that they're aligned. And these things don't say left or right, so you just got to flip them and see that the orientation is correct to line up with the clips. Alright, that one's in as well. Tight to the fender, not bad. So the next stage of this process is just to go ahead and start installing the bumper. And for that, I'm going to go ahead and install my bumper mounts first. Just get some gloves on, I don't want to contaminate anything. And really quickly, so you guys are aware, I took Plasti Dip and sprayed this mounting surface here where the bumper mounts will go. That is because the bumper mount and that entire structure is going to vibrate when the truck is running, when I'm driving, right? And over time, that mount wears into that and you have some rust formation. In order to combat that and reduce the incidence of that, it's going to happen, right? But in order to reduce how quickly it will happen, and in order to minimize the amount of rust that can form, I first painted that entire structure with a rust protection paint, and then on top of that, I went with the Plasti Dip and added a sort of cushion. So that wear surface has to, you know, basically come apart first before that area can start to rub into itself and expose metal and have some kind of rust that takes place. I'd like to avoid having the bolts that hold the bumper mounts onto the truck grind in and damage the paint on the mounts and cause corrosion over time. So I thought about ways to mitigate this, and while I was shopping at my local hardware store, I happened to see this stuff. Now this isn't your standard Plasti Dip, rather this is something similar to something I used to use when I worked in the machine shop at my university, and basically we would use it to protect certain end mills that we would use very rarely and didn't want corroding because they were made out of certain steels that were very susceptible to corrosion. So this stuff is kind of like that. You basically can dip a tool in here and it comes out with a nice hard rubber coating. So I'm going to go ahead and try that first with a set of pliers that don't have a rubber coating at the base. See, this is not similar to your standard Plasti Dip at all, which is a spray or a jar that of some stuff you can put in a gun and spray. Alright. Stuff is pretty thick. So it basically says to insert item an inch every 5 seconds and withdraw at the same rate. And allow 30 minutes minimum between coats. So let's try that. That's nice. So now it has like a nice little black rubber grip, which these things didn't have before, and honestly will make them much nicer to use. I'll let this hang up and dry, and then once this side is dry, I'll go ahead and I'll do this side. But now I know that this works, and I can suspend my bolt heads in here and get what I want. So we'll do that now. Alright, let's go dip these bolts in. I'm holding this with a clamp so that then I can just leave the clamp hanging on the wall. That'll allow this thing to dry off and just not touch anything while it does that, so I don't damage the coating I just made on it. I'll let it drip off somewhat. I don't want this to just have this massive bulge of rubber on it either. Alright, it's finally time to get this bumper on. I've gone ahead and put the bumper mounts in. The only thing I did beyond dipping the heads of the bolts in the plasti dip was I dipped the threads in grease just so that those wouldn't rust out. I've got my bumper on the floor here, so I'm going to go ahead and position it. But actually before I do, I'm going to go ahead and tape up my fenders where it lines up to the bumper, and the reason for that is the edges of that bumper may not seem sharp to your skin, but to that paint on the fender, it is extremely razor sharp and it will scratch up that fender, so I'm going to go ahead and tape that off first. Learned that by experience. You'll note that in an effort to protect my bumper from future corrosion, I've gone ahead and painted the inside with that black rust reformer paint. Let's go ahead and position this guy and see if we can get it aligned. The brackets on this bumper leave a lot to be desired. This is an aftermarket part. It's not OEM quality. So I'm worried that this may not line up very well, but we won't know until we try. And once I'm happy with all this, I'm going to go ahead and zip tie all the wiring for the fan to the bumper bracket to keep that stuff moving around in there. Like this one in. Let's see if we can Alright, I've got my bumper on, and I would say that it looks pretty good, except that this has got to be the worst paint match in the history of paint matches. I didn't notice it when I was painting the bumper in the garage by itself, but now bringing it in, putting it on the truck, and seeing it up against the fenders, it is not a match at all. I'm sure the camera's not going to catch it as well as your eyes will, but the paint on the truck is more of a grayish, like darker gray with a bit of a, I don't know, like more of a golden tone, whereas the bumper and the filler pieces above it are more of a bluish tone, like a cooler gray, more of a bluish sparkle. And it's crazy the difference. I have a couple of theories as to why this happened. For starters, the can of paint that I used, I've had that paint for probably 10 years at this point, so that paint is fairly old. It's been in a can sealed though, so I don't know how much that would have affected it. However, the paint on my truck is also fairly old, so it's definitely oxidized over time. That will cause it to change, but for it to be so disparate at this point, I'm almost of the suspicion that the body shop did not use the original paint code for my truck when they repainted it. And the reason I mention that is because I opened my engine bay, which has never been painted, and my engine bay has more of a bluish tone to it, kind of like this stuff. It's just, you know, the engine bay doesn't get the nice clear coating on it from the factory, so the engine bay is, you know, it's a bit of an oxidized or more vague gray, if you will, but it clearly has more of the bluish tint of the bumper versus what the body looks like. So I'm thinking the body shop probably just didn't use the correct paint code, maybe used one that was close to it, because when I first saw my truck it looked correct. And of course there's the oxidation factor, right? Like, this paint has been in the sun for many, many years at this point, probably almost 10 years itself. Whereas the other stuff was sealed in a can, this was in the sun. So over time, it's probably just oxidized and changed, and it's possible that it wasn't the right color to begin with. However, the paint on my truck is currently not in the best shape anyway, so I'm going to be repainting the entire thing, and hopefully at the end of that time, it will all match. Of course, if I find when I'm painting it that it's not matching up to the bumper or the filler pieces, I'll just repaint the bumper filler pieces so that everything matches the way that it's supposed to. However, I am happy to have a new front end on my truck that's not rusty, that's protected from rust, and just honestly looks so much better. I plasti dipped the entire lower valence in order to give it sort of a different look, and I have to say I'm really happy with the way that that came out. Then the paint match bumper, the black grille, every one of those little details makes it look so much better. I'm also going to go ahead and paint my hood. Right, it's carbon fiber, but right now it's just raw epoxy. It does not have a clear coat on it. You guys saw that I started a video where I did part 1 of restoring this hood. You will have to stay tuned and watch part 2 to see that completed. However, this completes my front end update, and I'm super happy to be where I'm at. Of course, the keen-eyed among you are going to say, what do you mean it's complete? You didn't put the turn signals back into the bumper. And there's a reason for that. I did put one of them on, and I simply didn't like how it looked. I much prefer how the black openings look. So I've always wanted to create like a little scoop that goes in there and just has like an LED ring around it that will, you know, turn amber and generate the turn signal. So I think this is going to be my excuse to go ahead and 3D print and build that. But for now, I'm just going to leave it as is. I'm not really driving this truck around anywhere. Brakes are still giving me trouble, so unfortunately it's going to reside in the garage for a while longer until I sort out a couple of those other problems, and then hopefully this truck can go back to daily duty, at least until I then tear it all back down and do the paint job. But in the meantime, for the immediate future, it's going to sit around. Another note is, when I painted my bumper, at the very top of it, I don't know if the camera would catch it, but there's some parts that, depending on the angle you look at it, look like black. And that's because, again, the paint is like 10 years old, and no matter how much I mixed it, I couldn't get it to stay consistent. This paint is actually a black paint with a bunch of like gray pearls in it, and you have to mix it up and get all the pearls suspended to create the color. So when I shot this, I kept mixing as much as possible. Even while it was in the gun, I would shake the gun back and forth. But there's some areas that look black, depending on the angle you're looking at them from. And obviously, this bumper could stand to be wet sanded and buffed. I'm just not going to do that now. I'd rather wait for it to bake in the sun for a while and be nicer, slightly harder paint before I start messing with that. But other than that, I'm happy with this. I can manage for now. And hopefully I'll be able to daily this thing soon, get the paint job done. And I'm also going to be painting my valve cover, or rather valve covers. I have 3 of these Tacoma valve covers, including the one that's currently on the motor. So I plan to paint 3 different colors. One of them I made body match like I did with this stuff. The other one is going to go yellow, which is going to be interesting. I did one for a friend's S2000, and he's had that probably 10 years as well. And it's held up really nicely, so I want to go ahead and do a yellow one because I really like the way that that looked. And I also want to do another one in white with the orange and yellow like striping from the TRD like Toyota race trucks. So I'll be doing videos on that. If you've enjoyed this video, feel free to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so that you're notified when I post another video. If you have any comments or feedback on how I can improve this, I'm sure there's a lot of you guys that are painters and can come back and tell me what the heck went wrong with this horrible paint match. Please feel free to leave that in the comments. And as always, thank you guys for watching.